November 10th, 1975. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the largest ships ever to sail the Great Lakes was fighting for its life. On board were 29 experienced sailors. They had weathered storms before. They trusted their captain. They trusted their ship. Then, without a distress call, without a mayday, without enough time to launch a single lifeboat, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald vanished. When rescuers arrived, they found no survivors, no answers, only scattered debris floating across the freezing waters of Lake Superior. Nearly 50 years later, the wreck still rests more than 500 feet beneath the lake surface, and the exact chain of events that doomed the Fitzgerald remains a subject of investigation and debate. Tonight, we retrace the final voyage of a ship that many believed was nearly unstoppable, and the storm that changed Great Lakes history forever. In the late 1950s, America's steel industry was booming. Factories demanded enormous quantities of iron ore, and every day, giant freighters crossed the Great Lakes carrying the raw materials that fueled the nation's economy. Shipbuilders responded by making the freighters bigger than ever before. One of the most ambitious projects was launched in Detroit on June 7, 1958. Her name was Edmund Fitzgerald. The vessel immediately stood apart from every other ship on the lakes. She stretched 729 feet long, longer than 2 football fields placed end to end. Her cargo holds could carry more than 26,000 tons of iron ore in a single trip. At the time of her launch, she was the largest ship ever built for service on the Great Lakes. The Fitzgerald wasn't just large, she was modern. Powerful diesel engines pushed her through waters that had humbled sailors for generations. Her massive self-unloading systems and advanced navigation equipment represented the cutting edge of commercial shipping. To many, she symbolized American engineering at its finest. For nearly 2 decades, the ship lived up to that reputation. She hauled millions of tons of cargo. She crossed the Great Lakes hundreds of times. She became so well known that tourists often gathered in ports simply to watch her arrive. Few ships earned the admiration that the Edmund Fitzgerald did, but every sailor on the Great Lakes knew one truth. No matter how impressive the ship, Lake Superior always had the final say. Lake Superior is unlike any other lake on Earth. It is the largest freshwater lake by surface area in the world. At its deepest point, it reaches more than 1,300 feet. Its vast size allows powerful storms to develop with surprising speed. Veteran sailors often describe it as an inland sea rather than a lake. Cold Arctic air frequently collides with warmer southern air over Superior, creating violent low-pressure systems. When autumn arrives, those weather systems become even more dangerous. November is especially feared. As temperatures drop, the atmosphere becomes unstable. Powerful winds sweep across hundreds of miles of open water. Wave heights can reach over 25 feet, and in some cases much higher. Visibility can collapse within minutes. Rain turns into freezing spray. Ice forms on decks and equipment. For generations, sailors gave these storms a name, the Gales of November. But cargo deadlines did not stop for bad weather. Freighters continued sailing. Most made it safely. Some never returned. The man commanding the Edmund Fitzgerald was Captain Ernest McSorley. At 63 years old, he had spent decades navigating the Great Lakes. Among fellow sailors, McSorley had earned a reputation as calm, disciplined, and deeply experienced. He wasn't known for taking unnecessary risks. His crew reflected that same professionalism. There were engineers responsible for keeping the engines running around the clock. Deckhands maintained equipment in freezing temperatures. Cooks prepared meals while the ship rolled beneath them. Every crew member understood the dangers of Great Lakes shipping. Most had families waiting at home. Some had children expecting them back within days. Others had spent much of their lives at sea. To them, another voyage across Lake Superior was simply another job. On the morning of November 9th, 1975, the Fitzgerald arrived in Superior, Wisconsin. Workers loaded more than 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets into her cargo holds. The destination was a steel mill near Detroit. Weather forecasts warned that a strong storm was moving toward Lake Superior. Storm warnings on the Great Lakes were serious, but they were not uncommon. Experienced captains had sailed through difficult conditions before. Captain McSorley reviewed the forecasts. Another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, was also preparing for a similar journey. The two captains knew each other well. Traveling along similar routes offered an advantage. Each ship could relay weather conditions and help monitor the other if visibility deteriorated. By late afternoon on November 9th, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed the harbor. As her engines rumbled to full power, few people on shore gave the departure a second thought. It looked like another routine voyage, but beyond the safety of the harbor, a massive low-pressure system was rapidly strengthening over the upper Great Lakes. Meteorologists were beginning to realize the storm could become one of the most powerful November systems in years. The crew of the Fitzgerald had no way of knowing that they had already begun the final voyage of their lives. As the Edmund Fitzgerald steamed east across Lake Superior, the weather began to deteriorate far faster than anyone had expected. The storm system gathering over the Great Lakes deepened rapidly. Weather forecasts issued earlier in the day soon became outdated. Wind speeds climbed. 40 miles per hour became 50. Then 60. The lake transformed into a violent expanse of whitecaps and crashing waves. The Fitzgerald wasn't alone. Trailing behind was another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Jesse Cooper. The Anderson followed several miles behind, using the Fitzgerald's navigation lights as a point of reference whenever visibility allowed. Throughout the day, the two captains exchanged weather reports over the radio. Each new conversation painted a more alarming picture. The waves were growing larger. The wind was becoming relentless. Rain mixed with heavy spray, making it nearly impossible to see more than a short distance ahead. By afternoon, Lake Superior had become a battlefield. Even ships as massive as the Fitzgerald were being thrown violently from crest to trough. Crew members struggled to move safely across the deck. Every step required caution. Every task became more dangerous. Still, despite the worsening conditions, neither captain appeared to believe the situation was beyond control. Experienced sailors had survived severe storms before. The Fitzgerald pressed on. Late in the afternoon, something changed. Captain Ernest McSorley contacted the Arthur M. Anderson with troubling news. The Fitzgerald had suffered damage. According to radio communications, the ship had lost both of its radar systems. Without radar, navigating through driving rain and darkness became far more difficult. McSorley also reported that the vessel had developed a list, meaning it was leaning to one side. This can happen when water enters a ship or when cargo shifts unexpectedly. The Fitzgerald was also taking on water. Pumps were working to remove it, but the crew was becoming increasingly concerned. To make matters worse, the storm showed no signs of weakening. Massive waves crashed over the bow again and again. Each impact shook the ship. Steel groaned under enormous stress. Every few seconds, thousands of tons of water slammed against the hull. Despite these problems, Captain McSorley remained composed. He adjusted course toward the relative shelter of Whitefish Bay, where the seas would be calmer. It was still several hours away. The crew only had to keep the ship afloat long enough to reach safer waters. At least, that was the hope. As evening approached, darkness settled over Lake Superior. The storm reached full strength. Hurricane-force gusts blasted across the lake. Some witnesses later estimated waves exceeding 25 feet, while others believed a few may have been even larger. Precise wave heights remain uncertain because of the extreme conditions. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The Anderson occasionally lost sight of the Fitzgerald entirely. At approximately 7:10 p.m., Captain Jesse Cooper radioed the Fitzgerald. He wanted to know how McSorley was managing. The reply came back calm, measured, professional. "We are holding our own." Those words have echoed through maritime history ever since. There was no panic in McSorley's voice, no declaration of emergency, no mayday. Just a captain trying to reassure another ship that his crew was still fighting through the storm. It would be the last confirmed communication from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Only minutes after that final radio transmission, the Arthur M. Anderson lost contact. The navigation lights that had flickered through the storm disappeared. Radar no longer showed the Fitzgerald. At first, Captain Cooper assumed interference from the storm was causing the problem. He continued calling over the radio. No answer. Again, silence. Then again, nothing. The Fitzgerald had vanished. No distress signal had been transmitted. No emergency beacon had activated. No lifeboats had been reported. 29 men had disappeared into one of the most violent storms Lake Superior had ever produced. Captain Cooper immediately realized something was terribly wrong. But in conditions this severe, there was little the Anderson could do except report the emergency and continue searching as safely as possible. The storm itself had become the greatest obstacle to any rescue. Throughout the night, the Arthur M. Anderson searched the darkness. Crew members scanned the water with powerful lights. They hoped to find survivors. Instead, they found floating debris, a damaged lifeboat, life jackets, wood, pieces of the once mighty freighter scattered across the waves. The Coast Guard launched one of the largest search operations in Great Lakes history. Aircraft flew over the storm-tossed lake, helicopters battled fierce winds. Additional ships joined the effort. Hour after hour, rescuers searched for any sign that someone had survived. No one was found. As dawn broke over Lake Superior, hope began to fade. 29 sailors had vanished without leaving behind a single survivor to tell the story. The only witness was the lake itself. By the morning of November 11th, 1975, there was little doubt that the Edmund Fitzgerald had been lost. The United States Coast Guard coordinated one of the largest search operations ever conducted on the Great Lakes. Aircraft crisscrossed the skies over Lake Superior. Coast Guard cutters battled towering waves. Commercial vessels joined the search, hoping against hope to find survivors. Instead, they found only fragments: a damaged lifeboat, life jackets, pieces of wood, twisted debris, floating across the cold, gray water. Days passed with no sign of the crew. Then, on November 14th, a U.S. Navy aircraft equipped with side-scan sonar detected a large object nearly 530 feet below the surface. The missing ship had finally been found. The Edmund Fitzgerald rested on the lake bed in two major sections, separated by about 170 feet. The bow section appeared relatively intact. The stern section showed far more severe damage. The discovery answered one question, but raised many more. What had happened during those final moments? How could a ship of this size disappear without a single distress call? And why had the crew never had a chance to escape? Almost immediately, investigators began searching for answers. But unlike an airplane crash, there was no flight recorder, no surviving crew members, no eyewitnesses to the ship's final seconds. Everything had to be reconstructed, from weather reports, radio communications, physical evidence, and later dives to the wreck. Over the decades, several major theories have emerged. Theory 1. Massive waves. One possibility is that the Fitzgerald encountered an extraordinary series of waves. Some researchers believe a combination of unusually large waves may have swept over the ship in quick succession, placing enormous stress on the vessel and allowing water to flood the cargo holds. While the storm was undeniably severe, the exact wave conditions at the moment of the sinking remain uncertain. Theory 2. Flooding through damaged hatch covers. Another leading theory focuses on the ship's cargo hatch covers. The Fitzgerald's cargo holds were protected by large steel hatches designed to keep water out. Investigators suggested that repeated impacts from heavy waves may have damaged or loosened some of these hatch covers. If enough water entered the cargo holds, the added weight could have reduced the ship's buoyancy until it could no longer stay afloat. This explanation has been supported by several official investigations, though debate continues over whether it fully explains the rapid sinking. Theory 3. Grounding on a shoal. Another possibility is that the Fitzgerald briefly struck a rocky underwater ridge, known as a shoal. If the ship had scraped the lake bed, it could have suffered structural damage below the waterline. Captain McSorley had reported damage before the ship disappeared, and some investigators believe an earlier grounding may have contributed to the loss. However, evidence for this theory remains contested, and not all investigations reached the same conclusion. Theory 4. Structural failure. Some experts have suggested that years of heavy service, combined with the tremendous forces generated by the storm, caused the hull to fracture. Modern ore carriers endure repeated bending as waves lift different parts of the ship. Over thousands of voyages, these stresses can weaken steel. If a critical structural failure occurred during the storm, the ship may have broken apart rapidly. Several examinations of the wreck have considered this possibility, but there is no universal agreement that it was the primary cause. The truth is, no single explanation has been accepted by everyone. Even today, maritime historians, engineers, and investigators continue to study the evidence. The exact sequence of events during the Fitzgerald's final moments remains unknown. In 1976, Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The song became an international hit, introducing millions of people to the tragedy. Today, the wreck is considered a protected maritime grave. Out of respect for the 29 crew members who never returned home, diving on the site is tightly restricted. Each November, memorial ceremonies are held around the Great Lakes. Church bells ring 29 times, once for every life lost. Families, sailors, and local communities gather to remember those who sailed into the storm and never came back. The Edmund Fitzgerald also changed Great Lakes shipping. Following the disaster, safety standards were strengthened. Changes included improvements to survival equipment, emergency procedures, inspections, and cargo hatch regulations, among other measures aimed at reducing future risks. While no safety system can eliminate the dangers of the Great Lakes, the lessons learned from the Fitzgerald continue to influence maritime operations. The Edmund Fitzgerald was more than a ship. It was a symbol of American engineering, a giant built to withstand the challenges of the Great Lakes. For 17 years, it carried millions of tons of cargo through some of North America's harshest waters. Then, in a single storm, it vanished. 29 experienced sailors boarded the ship expecting an ordinary voyage. None of them returned. Lake Superior kept its secrets, and perhaps it always will. Nearly half a century later, the Fitzgerald still rests in the darkness, over 500 feet beneath the surface, silent, undisturbed. A lasting reminder that even the strongest ships can be humbled by nature, and that some mysteries endure despite decades of investigation. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to explore more true stories of maritime disasters, forgotten history, and unsolved mysteries, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey into the past.